Started. Obviously, we were expecting a much larger crowd, but thank you to those of you that took time out of your day to join us for this meeting today. This is the second meeting of consulting parties and the general public for the Section 106 federal review process related to historic properties in Jackson Park. So my name is Abby Monroe. I am a planner with the Department of Planning and Development. I'm going to be sharing the presentation today with Elinor Gorski, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Planning, Historic Preservation, and Design. The Department of Planning and Development is co-facilitating this whole Section 106 process with our Department of Transportation as well, which is represented today by John Sadler here in the front row. And we are sort of doing this on behalf of the Federal Highway Administration, which is the lead federal agency overseeing the Section 106 process. And we have several folks from the agency in the room today. We also have several folks from our state-level agencies today in the room also. And the National Park Service also plays a role in this project, and they are participating today by webinar. So for those of you on the webinar, that hopefully you can hear me, welcome as well. And before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have a fairly comprehensive website that is growing every day with more and more information. The web address is on the screen here. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone had that. We're going to be referencing different resources that are online throughout this presentation. So today we're here in our second installation of our Section 106 process. We're going to do a brief overview of the project and the timeline. We're going to talk to you about what the Section 106 process entails specifically for these proposed projects, and then also how it relates to the environmental assessments that are going to be conducted by both Federal Highway Administration and the National Park Service under the National Environmental Policy Act. Many of you know we've recently issued 2 reports that help to identify historic properties within the proposed project area. One deals with archaeology and the other with architecture and landscape. So we're going to basically use this meeting time to go through those reports, help you understand what's in them and how you can best provide feedback. We'll close the meeting talking about effects assessments, which is the next step of the Section 106 process. And then there will definitely be time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. We'll have folks in the audience with microphones, and we'll be taking questions both from people in the room and online at our webinar. So just to get started, I think it's fair to say there's a lot of things going on in Jackson Park right now in terms of public engagement. Lots of different planning efforts taking place, and I just want to make sure everyone understands that today's meeting is specifically focused on Section 106, which looks at potential impacts to historic properties within the proposed project area. And this diagram is something we put together to help you understand the Section 106 process as a whole. We actually emailed to anyone that got an invitation to this meeting a set of handouts that includes this chart, and there are hard copies on the sign-in table outside, so if you're interested in taking one home, please do. This chart sort of shows the process as a whole. We kicked off Section 106 in December of last year. Right now, the red box indicating where we are in the process today, the identification stage. And the documentation column sort of showing that we recently issued the 2 reports that I mentioned, and here we are today having our meeting to talk about those reports and answer questions. So far, both Federal Highways and the National Park Service have sort of been looking at Section 106 together, and at this point, once today's meeting is over, they're going to sort of focus more on each of their own jurisdictions, what we're calling each of their federal actions or undertakings. So when we come back together to talk about effects assessment, we're going to be talking about things that the National Park Service is looking at uniquely versus things that the Federal Highway Administration is looking at uniquely. And if in either of those processes there are adverse effects determined, we will go on to a 4th stage of Section 106, which is discussing a memorandum of agreement. So the main reason that we're all going through this process is because the city has proposed 2 actions. The first, that the Obama Presidential Center will be located in Jackson Park, and the second, that transportation improvements are warranted to enhance connectivity and the quality of open space, specifically closing Cornell and Marquette Drive. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that those two things do not require federal approval, but they do sort of set the stage for why the federal government is involved. So there are two federal actions that are taking place once the city has made those proposals. The first is under the National Park Service, and their job is to determine if there's a conversion of recreation to non-recreation parkland within Jackson Park specifically. And that's because Jackson Park is a designated UPAR park, which stands for the Urban Park and Recreation Recovery Act. It's a program that was facilitated by the Park Service in the 80s. It no longer exists, but the city did receive money to enhance recreation resources within Jackson Park at that time, and that means that anytime a significant change to recreation takes place, the Park Service is welcome to come in and make sure that those recreational resources are preserved and protected. So in this case, the Park Service is looking at the OPC buildings that are considered non-recreational, so that's the museum building, the forum building, and the library building. They're also looking at the baseball fields that have been displaced by relocating the track and field that's planned. And they're also looking at any recreation areas that are gained and lost due to transportation or roadway changes. The second federal action is under the jurisdiction of the Federal Highway Administration. And what this map shows is what would happen if the city's action took place, if we closed Cornell and Marquette. All of the little red boxes indicate an area in the park where there would be an unsatisfactory level of service resulting. And so if the city would like to get funding to mitigate some of those difficult intersections or enhance the roadways to make sure that there is a satisfactory level of service, the Federal Highway Administration needs to approve the proposed mitigation strategies. And I think it's important to note also that there are additional requirements that are applied to the Federal Highway Administration under 4F. Those requirements are separate from Section 106, but what we do through this Section 106 process will help determine what 4F looks at. And if you are interested in that, we just added this morning another resource to our website, a tutorial that the Federal Highway Administration has put together to help understand what 4F is, since we're not going into too much detail on that today. So the reason that, so once these federal actions are proposed, under the National Environmental Policy Act, each federal agency is required to assess the effects of their proposed actions before making decisions. And so that, in this case, we're doing an environmental assessment both under federal highway and under the Park Service. There's a couple of things that you can sort of expect to see through the NEPA process, which is establishment of a purpose and need for the project, consideration of different alternatives, and then an assessment of impacts. So I just wanted to mention this now, even though that's not the topic for today's meeting, that we are starting to issue some of the documents associated with the NEPA review. In particular, FHWA's purpose and need statement is currently on our website right now. And there's no public comment deadlines for providing input on any of those documents, but it is suggested that you provide comment as early as possible so that it can have the most influence over the process. So NEPA is sort of the broader environmental review, and you can see in the blue boxes the different topics that will be considered in the environmental assessment. Section 106 specifically looks at historic resources and sort of serving as the historic resource review for this particular project. And just to remind you all that many of you in the room, I believe, are consulting parties. We've also opened this meeting to the general public, but those of you that are consulting parties, it's important to remember that that role is unique to the Section 106 process. And really what you're here to do is to provide input on identification of historic properties and potential effects to those. We want to make sure you have time to review all the documents that we're putting together, and definitely welcome you to share all of the Section 106 updates with your larger networks. So with that, I'm going to invite Elinor Gorski up to begin talking about the stage of the process, which is identification of historic properties.
So I think Abby drew the short straw because I get to talk about the fun part of this project now. She's gone through all the technical issues that we are trying to keep straight in this project. And part of it, as she mentioned, is identification of resources, and that's what we're here today to really talk about. And that kicks off the rest of the process, where we will then assess the effects of the project on the historic resources identified. So what does this mean, identification of historic resources? There are three different areas or three different products that have come out of this. One is an area of potential effect, and that's essentially a map of the area that we're talking about, and it defines what could be an area of either visual effect, auditory effect, or any type of historic impact that could happen by construction of either the roadways or the Obama Presidential Center. And two different areas of potential effect were defined, one for archaeology and one for architecture and landscape, and that's what you see on screen. So the APE for archaeology and for architecture, those were both put out after our December meeting, and we requested public comment on the boundaries of these areas. Archaeology was defined by where there could be potential ground disturbance, and that's why it's smaller than the architecture and landscape APE. And you see that on the left-hand screen, and outlined in blue are the areas that could have a potential impact from excavation. There were no comments received from the public on this, and the result of it was an archaeological survey, which I'll cover in a moment. The architecture landscape AP, we did receive numerous comments from the public, and these comments were compared against the criteria by which we defined this area. The boundaries were defined by looking at a linked development history, by proximity to the proposed construction areas, and the construction areas in this case are the defined project, the OPC site, as well as the roadway work, and the potential for viewshed impacts, and that would be the visibility of the new buildings on historic resources. So some of the comments we received, and these are all listed on our website as well as in the historic properties inventory, add Jackson Park Highlands and or the entire South Shore neighborhood, add the entire South Shore Park system, add the entire Midway, consider expansion to include a larger number of Southside cultural institutions and landmarks, and also to remove Promontory Point. So those were the main comments that we received, and in the end, after comparing it to the three criteria that we used to set the APE, it's really the expansion of the Midway that met all three criteria. So what you see in the map on the right is the entire Midway is now included, and that's outlined in red. So let's talk about the Archaeology Report that came out of the APE for archaeology. Once the boundaries were set, again, the sites were determined where excavation could happen, and this was managed by the Illinois State Archaeological Survey through the University of Illinois, and this was done by our colleagues at the state level. Field investigation techniques included visual inspection, coring, and these sites were determined based upon where they thought the greatest amount of resources would be occurring. There was an article in Sunday's Tribune that covered some of the findings and some of the summary of artifacts that were found, and on the screen are some of the images of what was found on the site. I'm not going to go through all of what was found. This is representative, but much of it did come from the World's Columbian Exposition, and that was anticipated. So again, the purpose of the archaeological survey was to determine, are there any resources, underground resources, that contribute to the history and understanding of this site and should be protected? And the conclusion was that based on these test digs and the analysis that that occurred afterwards, that there was no new information under criteria D, which basically states that new information would need to arise from the digs in order for it to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Again, this report is online for you all to see. The Historic Properties Inventory is the second report that was done, again, based upon the boundaries of the APE for architecture. This area is defined, as you see, in the yellow and red lines, and it is such a great area with different resources that was divided into three. And you see those defined as APE 1 and 2, A and B. What does the Historic Properties Inventory actually cover? Well, it is a large report, over 1,000 pages, so a purpose of this meeting is to kind of go through it and describe the different pieces to distill it down for you so you can hone in on what you're really interested in. But what it covers is a review of the federal undertaking and kind of a summary of what Abby covered to place the Historic Property Inventory in the process. It also describes the area of potential effect, the comments received to date, and then it goes into the broader historic context of not just the park, but the neighborhood in which it's situated. This is really important to provide a baseline as we talk about the impact of the new construction on this area. It then identifies the properties and the landscape features within the boundaries of the APE and describes them in terms of eligibility for listing on the National Register, as well as if they're already on the National Register. And all of this is detailed in appendices at the end, showing you our work, basically, and we do ask you to study those particularly for your area or neighborhood. Now, I'd like to touch very quickly on what qualifies for the National Register. And essentially, properties are generally 50 years or older and then are associated with events that have made a significant contribution to broad patterns of history, buildings that are associated with persons, significant, buildings or landscapes that embody distinctive characteristics of a type period, method of construction, or represent the work of a master, or, as I mentioned, in terms of archaeology, have yielded or more likely to yield information important in history or prehistory. So those are the criteria that the research team used, and the team consisted of our staff, as well as, excuse me, Connect, which is a team that is formed under our Department of Transportation, and we also had landscape architect consultants, Quinn Evans, involved. Another task of the Historic Properties Inventory is to establish a period of significance. How do you define what the periods of history are that are significant and then apply buildings to it unless you do the research and determine this is the cutoff date, this is where it was really important, a really important period for the park. On the screen before you, you can see that so many things happened in this park, it was really hard to determine that. For example, we have the World's Fair from 1893, many park plans by the Olmsted brothers. And then we have additions and buildings that occurred in the Works Progress Administration and in the Chicago Park District that are significant. However, the period of significance, after looking through the entire history of the park itself, was determined to be 1875 to 1953. And the reason being that in 1954, as many of you know, the Nike missile installation was installed in Jackson Park, and there were significant changes to the lagoons and the landscape at that time. And it began a period where the park was being compromised by roadway changes. So when we look at effects of these buildings, we are going to be referencing back to the period of significance. And by buildings, I mean the Obama Presidential Center as well as the roadway changes. We'll be referencing back to, does it affect something within the period of significance? So let's talk in detail about the different areas of potential effect. APE1 basically covers the parks. This area is on the National Register, and much of it has been documented through various books, surveys that have happened, but we don't really have a thorough National Register listing for it. It was an early listing. So the team spent a lot of time walking the park, researching history, taking new photographs, and documenting, as you see, sculpture, art, and landscape features. And on this screen are just a few examples of what they found. So APE1 also includes some residential land that is just west of Stony Island. And on the screen, again, are examples, I'm sure you're all familiar with, of residential buildings, institutional buildings along Stony Island. The same process occurred where the team went out, took photographs, reviewed the buildings to determine if they were eligible for the National Register, and their construction history was documented. So APE2, A and B, remember this was expanded to include the entire Midway, and you see the boundary on the screen. This was a large part of this to the north is already on the National Register as a residential district. And that National Register nomination we use as a basis for looking at the land that is north of the Midway. South of the Midway, there hadn't been a lot of documentation already put in place for the Woodlawn community, so there were surveys done through Google Earth, walking surveys, and research in this area as well. The Midway, again, remember this is part of the National Register nomination for Jackson Park, so we did have some information about it, and we were able to build on that. Again, documenting some of the historic resources on the Midway as part of this. One thing I do want to note in the Hyde Park nomination, this was more thorough than the Jackson Park nomination that had been done. However, it didn't include some mid-century or recent past buildings, and that was a particular focus of our research team to ensure that we caught more recent resources that may have been missed initially. So in our meeting in December, we brought this concept of an HPI to you all and asked you, as community residents, what do you want to see included? What's special or historic in your mind? And here is a list of what we received. Again, this is on our website. And in the location within the HPI, in the column on the right, you can see where we addressed it. This was really instrumental for our team in order to understand what's important to the community and also to make sure that no stone was unturned. And we'd ask you to look at this again and make sure that if there is something special or a resource that may not have been visible in terms of historic research or someone surveying, that it is caught in the HPI. Cultural landscape analysis is a building block of this project, really. As I mentioned, we have a consultant on board just to look at this for us. This is something that the City of Chicago and our team has not tackled before. So this is an area that we've asked for special expertise, and we're working very closely with the federal agencies in order to determine the cultural significance of the park and the impacts. So what you see on the screen are some of the resources that we are certainly looking at and our team has used, and we encourage you to educate yourselves as well to look through these. So the western perimeter where the OPC is being constructed was a particular area of emphasis for for the landscape team. Could I get some water, Abby? I'm sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that. So the western perimeter is an area, of course, where the OPC is being constructed and is a particular focus of the landscape analysis. The landscape analysis started by looking at the current conditions and the existing topography, and then going back to look at the historic plans and the evolution of this particular landscape. And what we have before you is just a sampling of what you'll see in the report and how it evolved over time. Now, let me go back to that for one moment. The maps that are pictured here are in the report, and I'd like to note that in the 1895 plan, this is essentially the plan that we're referencing when we talk about the period of significance, and the plan that we feel that the park followed up into the 1950s. And it was this plan that is being deviated from when the roadway changes occurred. So that's kind of an overview of what you'll find in the HPI, but how do you actually use it? Again, it's 1,000 pages. It's hard to go through, everyone will admit. So the primer for this is to look at the overall HPI map sections here to find which section you're interested in looking at, and you see that they're numbered. And then each map shows the detail similar to what you see here on screen. Outlined in yellow is the APE boundary, and then within that boundary, those are the buildings, landscape features, and monuments that were reviewed by the team. To drill down further, in APE 1, there was a chart made with photographs, and you see a representative sample of that here. Again, this is in the appendix, where all the information that could be found for a property or monument was assembled here in one place. And then there were also survey forms done for those particular buildings where further information was given, and those again are in the appendix. So both the archaeology and the HPI reports are online. Those were also sent to you, or a link to those were sent to you as part of the invitation for this meeting. We'd encourage you to look through those. Again, I wouldn't ask that you look through all 1,000 pages. You're certainly welcome to. But concentrate on those areas you're interested in. If we can be a resource to help you through it, you're welcome to come into the office. I believe we have some hard copies here. We can also have hard copies available for you if that's helpful. And I do want to note that the public comment period ends on April 19th for these reports. And the reason why we're holding this meeting today is to, again, give you a primer of how to use them, the purpose that we've placed them out there, and also if you have any questions, you have this additional time to ask us. It's not closing down the comment period today. And these are some questions that we'd like you to focus on too. So next steps. After we receive public comment, and those will be placed online so everyone's aware of the comments, those will be discussed among the federal agencies and in consultation with the State Historic Preservation Officer. The final content will be decided by those agencies, and with our assist, the final document will be posted online. And as I mentioned previously, this serves really as the baseline for then analyzing any effects on historic properties, landscape, monuments within the park, any impact that the proposed project would have on those elements. And again, as a reminder, the project is the library and the roadwork. So we're bringing back our Section 106 process, the next step being the effects assessment. As Abby explained, The effects assessment will be split into two, with the National Park Service looking at the effects for their particular issues, as well as FHWA looking at the effects on the road work. What would come out of this effects assessment is a document similar to these reports that you have already received that will discuss the effects on landscape and will analyze the effects on historic properties. I have here the rendered site plan of the OPC to talk in general about what the effects analysis, the result could be. As you see, there's a lot of work occurring in this location, and keep in mind too that this is an area where a lot of change happened, as we've documented in the HPI. So what we'll be looking at in particular, the impact of this project on the historic landscape, on the historic buildings identified in the HPI, and those can be buildings within the park close by. We have our little comfort station that's still here. That's been identified as a historic resource, and you can see that we're working around that for this particular part of the project. But also across Stony Island Avenue, we had identified that there are historic properties there. Will the work in this location have any impact on those properties? And there are a few ways that those can be categorized. No effect, an adverse effect, and I forget, was it no adverse effect, right? So it would be an effect but not adverse. Again, there's guidance on how to determine the effects, and we're sharing this with you so that it's a resource that you can look at. Our team's using this as we go into the effects analysis. It's both to look at the National Register criteria for evaluation and as well as historic landscapes. So the National Park Service, as Abby described, they're interested in changes to recreation in Jackson Park, and how do those changes affect historic properties? I mentioned the comfort station, but we also have the cultural landscape review that will need to happen. And of course, that includes circulation, topography, vegetation, and views. FHWA and their focus will be on the roadway improvements, not the closures, and how those impact historic properties. And really, this includes cultural landscape at this point, as far as we can see, though we will be, of course, looking to see if there are any tangential effects to historic properties or monuments. So the next step in the process is to distribute an effects assessment, a draft. We anticipate it will be a similar process to what we did today, where we will distribute that document to you, and then maybe 2 weeks after distributing it, we'll have a meeting such as this to talk about it. We're hoping that that can be more of a short presentation and then kind of a workshop-style discussion where we can really get into the effects and have a discussion among all the consulting parties as to what was found. So a new piece of this project I did want to bring up today, and Abby touched on it lightly again, is the Urban Parks and Recreation designation on Jackson Park. Part of the Park Service's determination if recreation has been displaced is to ask where will the City of Chicago replace that recreation. And it's been determined through the Park Service in consultation, of course, with the city, that the east end of the Midway, as you see circled here in this map, would be a fine replacement site for recreation to satisfy the UPAR requirements. And I do want to stress that the replacement recreation needs to be something the community is looking for. It needs to go through a community process. This is not predetermined. This is not a recreational opportunity that the Park Service will dictate. It's very important to them that we hear from the community, and what's improved on this property is something that is supported by the community. And why are we doing this? The Obama Presidential Center on the western perimeter, as you know, is moving. The location of the building is prompting a move of the track and field to the south. And when that is moved to the south, there are 2 baseball fields that then need to be relocated. One of the baseball fields, as you may have seen in the Park District presentation of their master plan, will be relocated within Jackson Park. And we have the recreational opportunity of a baseball field that does need to be addressed with the Park Service. However, it does not need to be a baseball field. It simply needs to be a recreational opportunity that is active, and they are looking for community input on what that would be. And then one last piece of this, once that's determined what the recreational use will be and we're in agreement with the Park Service, then the U-Part designation on that acreage would be carried forward. And essentially what that does is it designates it as parkland, as a recreational opportunity, and if that were removed or changed, we would need to do so in consultation with the Park Service. Referencing again our project website, I know this presentation has been very dense. There's a lot on here, so we do encourage you to use our website, look for updates. There is a schedule on there that we are updating. And please make sure that we have your email address, and at the sign-in table, if something has changed or if you'd like to have another email where things are sent, since we're sending you, all this information, please check in up there. And I think we're going to do Q&A now.
It is on? Can everyone hear me? Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, we're going to start with our Q&A period right now. Elinor is going to stay on the stage to answer your questions. We also have other experts in the room that help prepare these reports. We're really interested in what you have already seen, or if you have questions about what the reports include. And I'll walk around. We also have some folks in the back of the room that can come to you as well. So start right here in front.
So, Louise McCray, Jackson Park Advisory Council. It's really exciting to see all those artifacts that were found underground. So my request is we give free tours on Saturdays to take people through Jackson Park and show them all the wonders of the World's Fair. Could some of those artifacts be given for educational purposes, to have in the field house as well, to be able to show people the artifacts from the fair?
I was going to say maybe Brad could answer that since he worked so hard on our archaeology report, and just talk about what you typically do with the things you find.
Sure. So I am Brad Kolzoff, the Chief Archaeologist with IDOT. I oversaw the investigations for the University of Illinois State Archaeological Survey. The artifacts are to be, I think, part of the parks, because they were recovered from the park. And so they should be curated by the park and available for exhibits. And someone has suggested they be a display in the Obama Center as well. But they should be, that's to be worked out with the city and the Parks Department.
Okay, other questions? Hand back here. They are actually a good point. We are absolutely going to take questions from the webinar. We're going to talk to a few people in the room first, and then we have somebody prepared to bring those questions up online.
My name is Dwayne Digby, Commodore Southern Shore Yacht Club. My question is that I saw on the map that you had one of the historical places as the Museum of Science and Industry, but I didn't see anything on there that said anything about Southern Shore Yacht Club, and we are 105 years old. So we thought that we would be shown as a historical landmark also.
Okay, we'll take note of that. Thank you.
Okay, right here.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, Elinor. Bonnie McDonald, Landmarks, Illinois. I think it's very important to hear more about the Section 4F process at this point, if you can talk about how that has synergy with the 106 process, because we really do need to take this opportunity to get the HPI and the APE right, since that is going to inform the 4F, and the public will have less opportunity to guide that process. So could you please talk about that? And also, I just want to note that Landmarks Illinois asked for the Highlands to be included in the APE, which we think is very important, and we do not see that. So could you comment on specifically why the Highlands was not included, and then are there any other mid-century modern sites that were not included in the HPI that we should note specifically in the report? Thanks.
Thank you, Bonnie. So as I mentioned, there were some criteria that we used for the APE and defining the boundaries, and that includes the development history, the proximity to construction site, and ability to see any of the construction from a particular area, or to see the projects from a particular area. Looking mainly at the criteria of visibility, we have done modeling of the tower itself at the height it's proposed to check its visibility in different areas. And that is a criteria that we felt the Highlands did not meet. And as you may be aware, the Highlands itself is a Chicago landmark district, and it has been for quite some time. And it's an area that we have a lot of information about the resources there. So though it has not been included in the AP for this particular project, it is a significant resource to the city, and it's recognized as such. Now, for 4F, I'm going to ask John Sadler to come up here with our Department of Transportation, or speak from your seat. It's up to you, John.
Hello, good afternoon. John Sadler, Department of Transportation. Thank you for your question, Bonnie. 4F actually refers to a section in the 1966 U.S. Transportation Act. The act is basically defined, and what a 4F property is a property that is either a historic part or has special characteristics, or is historic or is park or wildlife refuge or has certain characteristics that the act, the 1966 Act, requires a U.S. DOT to take particular attention to and be able to, through evaluation, select an alternative to construction that would avoid these types of properties. So a 4F property being a park and dealing with the historic nature of the 106 property, through the process, we need to look at ways to avoid or ways to find a feasible and prudent alternative that minimizes the effects to the park. All of this information is in much more detail on the website. There's the FHWA tutorial is fantastic. I recommend everybody going to the website and understanding the rest of this. But for the time being, well, not for the time being, part of this process will be to work with FHWA and follow the 4F process as we move forward in the rest of our NEPA procedures.
The other hand, there's one over here. Oh, you'll be next. One person behind you, and then I'll come up front. Okay, sorry about that.
There you go.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for this the in-depth report. Our historic parks especially need these, and other parks as well that may be considered to be not up to their potential, et cetera, or need repairs and things too, so we can document what's there and then use that in conjunction with what the community needs for parks, the whole recreation considerations, environment in general, et cetera, so we can plan for the future of our parks. I don't see, and this is so well written and so detailed, and it goes along with the wonderful works which have been done by Julia Backrack, Victoria Rainey, and others, and I want to make sure they're recognized. I haven't been able to find in there too much about the why one structure is being recommended for, not recommended, but eligible for the National Register, and how it isn't. Is it there, and what so some of us maybe can get to work on some of these things, especially those that need considerable repair, and we're going to have to start gathering the resources. Also, I don't see much about certain kinds of landscape effects, such as evaluating when certain kinds of trees are removed. Some are more valuable than others, some are more mature than others. It takes a long time for them to grow back. And I hope I'm not stealing your thunder. And so perhaps a little more information on that is warranted as well.
Thank you.
So if I could summarize, so the landscape analysis, you're looking for more information about the vegetation, it sounds like, in terms of that. So that's something we'll know. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Gerry Edelman, President and CEO of Open Lands, and we're a 55-year-old regional land conservation organization based in Chicago, but working in the three-state metro area. And we're very much concerned about connecting people close to nature, close to where they live. So I do have some kind of high-level process questions that are somewhat technical, so I'd like to read, it's a very brief statement, but read them so I don't get confused. Open Lands finds the draft purpose and need for road work very confusing, as it appears to use circular logic. The Historic Properties Inventory Report says that the project team will evaluate a range of alternatives to meet the purpose and need for the roadway project. Yet the draft report in support of the South Lakefront Framework Plan narrows that purpose and need solely to how road improvements will address impacts caused by road closures. The purpose and need instead should reflect that the road work and the associated impacts are to accommodate the Obama Presidential Center in Jackson Park. Why does the recently released purpose and need for the project assume that proposed road closures are part of a baseline no-action alternative when they are planned directly in response to the building of the Obama Presidential Center in the park? The no-action alternative should only include roads that would otherwise be closed or improved even if the center were never built in Jackson Park. The proposed NEPA study doesn't acknowledge that the whole road reconfiguration must be considered as one action under NEPA. Should the full scope of road work include, since the full scope of road work includes reconfiguring Lakeshore Drive, NEPA should apply to the project. This should be clear when referencing the NEPA process and the different review processes for the center. The scope of the NEPA review should extend to all reasonable road alternatives in the project area. And this project area should be broadened to consider all anticipated direct, indirect, and cumulative effects of reconfiguring the roads. We are also concerned about the content, order, and timing of all the different elements of the NEPA review process. NEPA is a procedural umbrella for substantive reviews, such as Section 4F impacts, any permitting requirements under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and the Section 106 review process. Our question is, why doesn't this review also include cumulative impacts? Running each process in isolation is contrary to the NEPA requirement to take a hard look at all the direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts of different alternatives to site and operate the Obama Presidential Center. How will Section 106 and the other substantive review processes be folded into the NEPA study and holistically considered so that the preferred alternative complements and protects the natural and recreational values, historic context, and sense of place of Jackson Park? According to Section 106 documents, scoping for the NEPA review is already occurring. How will the public participate in each stage of the NEPA review process, including scoping, and when will that schedule be publicly available? Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Those were extensive and very detailed, and I appreciate the thought. And I would ask you to please email a copy of all of the things that you just mentioned to me, or to the dpd@cityofchicago.org email address, so that we can answer all of them in detail. I'll offer to our colleagues at CDOT or FHWA if they'd like to say anything now, but I think probably since there were so many questions in there, we might table that and respond through the website or by email. Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions about section 106? I see one back here. Maybe Todd can get to him, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago. In the Western Perimeter Integrity maps, if you will, that you showed, was wondering if you might take it a step further and also show the 1930s plan, because we have drawings that state that Alfred Caldwell was very much involved with the Park District and a berm and a vegetation plan and tree planting plan along Stony Island Avenue from 60th to 67th Street, along with a planting plan for 67th Street, which takes you along the golf course, as well as drawings for various holes. I think it's 8 through 11 on the golf course. So I just wanted to make everybody aware that there's these Alfred Caldwell plans out there, and he's, you know, one of those great landscape legacy architects, much like Olmsted, and very important to Chicago. And I think that it would, to disturb his work without proper vetting of that and understanding of that would really be a huge oversight. So I don't think we want to go there. But looking at the plans and looking at, you know, how we're doing this, and by the way, I must admit, you know, we're looking at these reports and all these documents that are being generated, and I kind of wish this was done for every park around Chicago. It would be really a fabulous document to inventory these structures and significant features, and to recognize them and honor them and protect them looking to the future. But, you know, are the road closures really required for Jackson Park? This will have such a significant impact on Olmsted's plan, as well as efforts going to the future with the golf course. And just wanted to again ask if, you know, someone can do a study at the city level that, you know, will not impact the park in such an adverse way as, you know, the building of these structures, all these road closures, a widening of South Lakeshore Drive and Stony Island, recognizing the historic and legacy significance of one of the great parks of the United States.
Thank you for those comments.
Yeah, I can defer to my colleague at CDOT, but Ward, there is an extensive review of the roadway network that started last summer, and a lot of the issues with the roadway system have been documented. John, did you want to add to that?
No, we are the roadway closures, and I just want to clear, we're here on the 106 process today, and it's part of the federal the road closures are not part of the federal review at this point. It is part of what we are collaborating on with the city and determining to close those roadways. But we see that we have opportunities for better connectivity through the park and being able to improve the trail networks and other aspects of the park that the roads have really cut off and made less accessible over time. So we're hearing both sides of that.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Let's take one question up here in front.
So mine is partially a question and more of a statement. And so though I respect part of the Olmsted legacy, I also want to mention the fact having people who have accessibility issues in my family, and having come from a park where we have just had major remodel done to allow for accessibility for our TR program that host over 40 youth and young adults that have accessibility issues. We have to look to the future of an aging populace and people who are going to need to be able to access the land around the parks. There has to be landscape changes for those people who need accessibility. So the changes to Cornell Drive, the changes to having underground passageways, the changes for the youth who are going to be attending the high school, who are going to be accessing the recreational area, it has to be safe. And so as much as we love our parks, we have to be able to access those parks, and it has to be safety first, and accessibility is going to have to be one of the #1 issues that has to be addressed.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, I see some hands right here in front. Okay, we'll go back to Todd, and then we'll come up here, and then we'll take a couple questions from the webinar.
Hi, Kenneth Newman. I'm on Jackson Park Advisory Council. So one of the issues that has really not gotten enough, there's not been enough negotiation on, enough feedback, is the golf course destruction of athletic fields on the east side of Cornell and the lack of parking, free parking, I want to say, that's going to be left after the new Hayes Drive area takes free parking away from people using the athletic fields both south of Hayes Drive and that are north of Hayes Drive. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people from the community that use those soccer fields, use those baseball fields, and you are just taking an area that is well used 8 to 9 months out of the year, and you're taking it away from people for reasons that are unfair and frankly silly. The golf course is still not going to get any more use than it presently does, and the athletic fields are going to be destroyed on the east side of Cornell Drive, and there's no place to replace them.
Okay, I'm going to come over up here. Oh, go ahead, Louise. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brendan Elms with Jackson Park Watch. I have a question specifically relating to the Historic Properties Inventory assessment, which talks about that Jackson Park, in spite of all that's been done to it, still retains a very high level of integrity in feeling, association, design, and setting and so on, and that the roads and paths are a contributing resource to that, even though it's repeatedly remarked that Cornell has been widened too much. But given that assessment of historic integrity, why would not the logical goal be to narrow Cornell, to retain the integrity, to restore the integrity, rather than to have a costly new wave of road widening that involves taking other parts of the slices from the east and west sides of the park, that then creates many new wide roads, highway-like, on either side of the park and through the park and, along Hayes, that divide it up in different ways. So the basis for the conclusion that seems to be coming out is illogical given what you've assessed in the inventory.
I'm not sure of the question, but I will state that this is a baseline survey of the conditions in the park. Next step will be the assessment, where we determine, particularly in the western perimeter, what the effects will be on that landscape. So it's very important, your comments now. If you believe that there is integrity in these certain areas where the work will impact it, to give us your comments. If there is something we missed, if there is a differing view of the analysis of the integrity, we'd like to hear that. So thank you for your comment.
Okay, we're going to go back to the webinar really quick, and then we'll come back up front. So if Erica, if you want to read a question from our online participants.
Sure. Let me get back to the first question here. Is the current roadway configuration in Jackson Park, including those roads that have been widened, a defining characteristic of the Olmsted, and Elliott plan of the park?
There are certainly elements of the Olmsted plan in the roadways. How they have been widened or how they've been altered over time, that has deviated from the plan. And there are particular details described in the HPI that deal with the different sectors of the park.
Maybe one more from online.
The next person. Another comment has to do with the archaeology portion. The commenter believes that there is more information to be found via the archaeological research, and asks, and also says that the stories of working class people, people of color, women, and children are not in the documentary records of the fair, and that the archaeological record may have that information.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. So just so everyone knows, all of the questions that are being asked online are being recorded, and if we don't get to all of them in this Q&A period, we will keep them and make sure that any questions that are pertinent to Section 106 get answered. So go ahead, Louise. Thank you.
Hi, Margaret Schmidt, also with Jackson Park Watch. And a related question to some of the broader, bigger picture issues that have been asked. The first paragraph of Section 1.0 of the Draft Historic Properties Inventory refers to, quote, the decision to locate the Obama Presidential Center in Jackson Park, road closures in Jackson Park, and other changes in Jackson Park identified in the South Lakeshore Framework Plan. However, as demonstrated in the chart that we have here and we're going to hand to you and we will send in, the South Lakeshore Framework Plan has not even been concluded, and all of these decisions were made prior to the announcement that there would be a revisiting of the 1999-2000 South Lakeshore Framework Plan. You appear to put the cart before the horse in every regard, you and everyone who is involved in this process, and we would like to understand how this can possibly be explained.
Well, I'm happy to take a look at that wording in there. I believe it was clearly defined at the beginning of the presentation, the city actions, the project, and that does include the library and the proposed roadway improvements.
Okay, any other questions here? One in front.
Patricia Harper, and I wasn't expecting to have to comment on the golf, but I'm going to get to my question first, which relates to that. I'm a member of the Women's Jackson Park Golf Club that's been at Jackson Park for almost 100 years, 90-some years. I also play with the South Shore Ladies Golf Club, which is at the South Shore part, and I wasn't expecting to have to talk about golf based on your agenda and presentation. And if I understood you correctly, when you were talking about the roadway closures, because that's primarily what affects what was not talked about here today, because the building and all of the easements are on the exterior and around. But fundamentally, it seemed that the process, and I will read it, was, am I correct in assuming that this was a significant part, had to do with safety of park utilization in general, which I can sit here and just testify to just what me, the single golfer, I have to cross roadways to play 18 holes of golf, not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 times, active roadways. And there are bike paths and so forth that are also impacted by this. So while I do understand the concerns that are raised, I can't imagine that safety and security, and it appears that that the proposal is attempting to address the safety and security of those people who use the park. And I'm sorry, I just have to take umbrage with the gentleman who said that the golf course would not be used more based on the renovations. That's unimaginable. Thank you.
Thank you for those.
I do want to add, though, that in addition to, of course, park safety, as John mentioned, this is to upgrade the biking trails as well and to make it safe for all park users. So that's certainly part of the city's consideration and proposing as part of the project. Thank you.
Any other? I see one question here.
Hi, Fred Bates from Friends of the Parks. Could you clarify what the selection of the time frame ending in 1953 has as an impact, and whether it makes a lot of the very critical historic changes that have taken place in the Jackson Park arena since that time vulnerable in any way, or whether it opens them up to changes that are, in a sense, not incorporated in your concepts?
So as I mentioned earlier, this was a question that our team wrestled with, our consultants at large, where this period of significance should end. And we really saw a deviation from the Olmsted planning principles that had characterized the initial beginnings of the park and the implementation of the various recreational opportunities there, ending in the 50s, again with the widening of roads, a different concept of this urban space, and as well as adding the Nike missile silos, the filling in of lagoons. There was a lot of work that had occurred after this time period that, again, deviated from the overall historic concept of the park that was seen in earlier plans. So as to the impact, that is something that we will be looking at through the effects assessment. Largely, we don't see historic resources being impacted by that cutoff date, those properties eligible for the National Register. But that's something that we're looking for the consulting parties' help with. If you have comments about that or anything to add, certainly we'll take that into account for the final.
Do you want to follow up?
Yeah, let me just expand to just one simple example. For example, around the 57th Street beach area, there have been many changes there which I would consider historic and appropriate, and probably in sort of line with the Olmsted thinking about the whole area. Is that now vulnerable, or is that sort of safe? The cutoff date would keep it vulnerable, from my guess.
So, the period of significance, as we're defining it right now at this project, again, can evolve. As I mentioned with the Hyde Park National Register nomination that was done some time ago, it didn't account for mid-century modern buildings. Now that we're looking at this afresh, we are including some of those buildings as eligible resources. So the 57th Street beach, I'm not sure if those resources would be impacted by any of the road work that we're doing. That's something that we can look at in detail. But in general, if it's in an area where it won't have an impact either through the construction work or visually, we wouldn't be looking at it in detail in the next assessment. Is this an area that you feel will have an impact from the roadway changes? Yes? Okay. Well, we will certainly take a look at that, in particular at 57th Street Beach. And I think this will be a great conversation when we come back together in May, too.
Okay, any other there.
Mike McNamee from Save the Midway. So the city has granted for the Obama Presidential Center some parkland from Jackson Park, or that's gone through. And so the projection now is that if that was to go through, then the track and field would get moved, and then that would displace a baseball field. And now the UPower is looking at possibly putting that baseball field or some recreation on the Midway. Would it also be possible that the city would consider looking at replacing the recreation area on some of the parkland which the Obama Foundation has pledged to add as a part of this process, somewhere that's now not parkland.
I'm probably going to speak out of school here since, this isn't really discussion of parks in terms of replacement recreation that we believe will be a pretty thorough process in the summer. But the U-Part designation does not preclude adding more recreational opportunities around the neighborhood. And that is certainly something that the Park District is always looking for, and I'm sure that will be part of the discussions this summer.
Hi, Lauren Malls, Friends of Parks. I'm curious about the process of the Obama Presidential Center moving forward at the same time that these processes are on. How does that work?
Are you particularly meaning the plan development process?
The plan development process as they move forward in getting permits and going to the Plan Commission, and when these processes are still moving forward and not been decided, their impact.
Sure. In order for the project to be defined, and if FHWA wants to speak, I'd certainly open it up to you, but it's my understanding that for the project to be defined in order to review alternatives and to get into further detail through the NEPA process, they would like the local municipality to determine what is acceptable, and that is what we would do through the plan development process. So that is something that we have sequenced very carefully to fall at this point in the process prior to finalizing or carrying out further NEPA consultation, because we do need to define at a local level what that project could be. Now, in terms of Plan Commission and what the Plan Commissioners see, if you haven't, there's plenty of information on the Obama Foundation website, and that describes the plans. There have been numerous public meetings. I'm sure there will be maybe one or two coming up. When that project is presented to the Chicago Plan Commission, that will be, again, another open process for public comment. And it will be acknowledged by the Plan Commission that the federal process needs to occur, and that if changes do come out of this federal process, that the plans either for the center or for the roadway work may need to be tweaked based upon what comes out of the federal review.
Okay. Question over here.
Thanks. My name is Alice Dan. I just want to say that this meeting sets a model for how public input and public meetings should go. That is, there should be open question and answer periods. I've been really disappointed by the Park District meetings and the Obama Foundation meetings because we never have this kind of chance to openly ask questions and get feedback. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Oh, up here in the top.
My name is Bill Bomber. I live here in Hyde Park. Talking about sequencing, my question is, you're talking about road closures and the process to widen and build and finance the new roads are going to be years in the future. What is the whole plan for how they're going to do that? Because if they want to start the Obama Center in December, and they close Cornell in February, when do we think that those other roads are actually going to be opened and widened? Because I can't see it for another 5 to 7 years.
Like any major project, what we will develop is what we call a staging plan. And we are collaborating with the Obama Presidential Center to come up with what that staging plan would be. And that would be dependent on many things, including funding, But we are looking at traffic and understanding that we can't close one road while we're constructing another. So those plans are going to be developed, and we are not simply going to work on any plan on every section at the same time. It will be staged as part of a coordinated effort between not only the Obama Presidential Center, but in the Department of Transportation, we do have a project coordination office specifically to make sure that we're looking at the neighborhoods as a whole and coordinating currently with other utility companies and other plans and other projects that we know that are coming out in the next several years to ensure that when this project does come, we would have a minimal impact to the neighborhood around.
Oh, we did take some, but we can take a few more. Erica, if you have any more questions in the back there.
Yes. If replacement parkland involved in the U-Park conversion is itself listed in or is eligible for listing in the National Register for Historic Places, will the potential effects on the replacement parkland be considered under the current Section 106 review process?
Very good question, and the answer is yes.
Anything else?
Yes. The historic properties inventory refers to only one UPAR grant related to Jackson Park. Is that accurate, or were there other grants?
There were two UPAR grants.
We'll make note of that.
Between our records and the Park Service, we have two.
Any other questions, Erica? Or?
Some of them are quite specific, but this one, has the OPC submitted a programming plan to National Park Service regarding whether some portion of the OPC facilities will meet the recreation usefulness standard of the UPAR program?
We have had those discussions with the National Park Service, yes.
Okay, I think I saw one more hand up here. Yes, and then, oh, go ahead, Todd. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to the question of, it's partly a question of the 1993 cutoff, and it's also a question, Elinor, of your assertion that the 1893 road map is the baseline against which you're comparing the other road changes. And I would just want to observe and maybe ask you to comment in the future or something. When you look at in your HPI on page 63, there you have a list there of Jackson Park roadway changes with dates. And there were many significant roadway changes between 1895 and 1953. So it's very hard to see how that sort of makes sense logically in terms of what you're considering to be major roadway changes or things that you're overlooking altogether. We are particularly interested in some of this. We are particularly interested, as are many, in the proposal to take out Cornell and the assertions that Cornell has been particularly adversely impacted. Seems to be totally a matter of judgment. When you look at your diagrams, look at all the different historical period pictures, and look at all these dates. So I just want to, I guess, say that. I don't know if there's a response at the moment, but it seems like an important point to pursue.
I have a response. The information that we put on screen in terms of the resources that we used as a background, that's why we have them up there and noticed in the report so that you can also see the National Register guidance and the Park Service guidance when it comes to evaluating these resources. So again, those comments are valuable to us. I'd encourage you to write those in, and that's something that we'll be able to evaluate with our team and our landscape experts. This isn't a hard and fast science by any means, and we're the first to admit that, and I hope I made that clear in this presentation. In looking at other projects of this magnitude with this many layers, it's really hard to find one. And because of that, we've tried to assemble the best on our consultant team to help us go through all of these criteria. The particular question that you asked with the various roadways, we're not saying that If something was constructed after the 1895 plan, it's not historically significant. Certainly there were changes made. But what we're saying is that after the 1950s, those changes deviated more from the Olmsted vision. So again, we're happy to have this discussion. In the next 2 weeks, we can certainly do that. And then at the May meeting, we'll be talking about effects and the conclusions too.
Okay, I see two more hands.
Hi, I'm Bronwyn Nichols-Lodato, and with the Midway Park Advisory Council. First off, welcome to everyone who's here to the Midway. It's right outside the door. Just wanted to ask about the UPAR process. You had mentioned earlier that there would be meetings over the summer. So I just wanted to get more specificity around the timeline for that replacement decision process. And then secondly, if you can give any additional information regarding the categories of recreational opportunities that MPS recognizes.
So I'll answer your second question first. The categories of recreational opportunities is probably as wide as you can think. I mean, we've talked about pickleball and curling and bocce, and every single sport that you can think of is a recreational opportunity to the Park Service. What they have requested in this case is that it be an active recreation opportunity and one that is requested by the community and supported by the community. So in our discussions with them, when they say active, it really is everything but a passive meadow as far as I can see. So that is something that we do want to talk to the community about this summer and include MPS as part of that dialogue. And the reason why we want to start it this summer is we really want this to go forward and improve that portion of the Midway, and to get that started as part of this whole process just seemed to make sense. As to the end date of when the planning would stop or when it would be constructed, that is something that I don't have right now, but I think the important fact for today is that we do want to create a recreational opportunity at the end of the Midway and with the community assistance.
I do just want to recognize too that there have been community meetings that have occurred some years ago that resulted in the development of a framework plan for the Midway. And there were specific plans related to that particular portion with community input, Chicago Park District, University of Chicago. And so as part of the comments, you know, one of the things that I'm interested in doing is making sure that that's included as part of the record as content to inform any planning for that particular stretch of the Midway, regardless of what the determination is for the replacement of that baseball field in Jackson Park. These are kind of two separate tracks, and understanding that MPS is recommending, from my understanding, that stretch, but it is not a fait accompli. That particular stretch would be used for that replacement of the space that it's recommended, and that the community input and transparency around that is of considerable importance moving forward.
Just a follow-up to that, the plan for the Midway is recognized, and MPS has a copy of it. They're well aware of the community plans and the fact that a children's garden was proposed, and that is where our discussion started as to what's acceptable recreation. And the nature playground garden that has been described most recently is something that they do recognize is something the community has expressed an interest in. And the reason why we would be doing further planning work, despite the fact that that plan exists, is circumstances certainly have changed in the neighborhood in that 10-year period. And so it's good to revisit these things in a timely manner.
Okay, I think I saw one more question from Ward, and then we'll close the meeting after this. We have representatives here from the various local, state, federal agencies. We're all going to be out in the lobby. There are several posters that we brought. So if anyone has more specific questions, we'll stick around for a little bit longer to be able to answer those one-on-one. But we'll close with one more question.
Abby, I just wanted to see if there were any further webinar questions afterward, if we could do that really quick.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Ward.
Thank you again. Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago. My question is, two questions. Will there be any more archaeological studies on the site of the OPC, realizing that the borings were somewhat limited, maybe a half a dozen, perhaps a few more, but this is such an important site, and from the newspaper articles that we saw and parts of the report, there were some interesting components that were found that weren't, part of the presentation today. Foundations of World Fair buildings, pieces of Louis Sullivan's a transportation building, determining, the actual color of that building. And, perhaps if there were more borings that would bring more interest and more discovery of this area. And of course, this was also the site of Sophia Hayden's women's building that was so extremely important on the world stage. Encourage more of those archaeological borings in the area. And then secondly, we understand this is about a 20-acre site for the Obama Center, but we also understand that most of that 20 acres will be absorbed by construction. And, big projects like this require staging areas. And, we've heard stories of, this 20 acres perhaps needing 40 acres of park space to accommodate all the construction equipment and bulldozers and cranes and whatnot for this area. I was wondering, is that part of the discussion at any point in time? Because, that would double this site, and we're very concerned about any impact on this really delicate and remarkable park. Thank you.
I'm passing this question to John Sadler, who's been more involved with the construction questions.
I don't believe there'll be any more archaeological digs as part of this study. In working with the Obama Presidential Center and working on their staging plans, they are in the early stages of their developing their stages for construction. Any rumor of them taking over 40 acres is completely false. Anything that I have seen to date has been really confined to within their boundaries, so I don't believe that that's going to be an issue.
Okay, Erica, anything left on the webinar to discuss?
Yes, there are a couple more questions. Will the PowerPoints be available online, or will they be sent out?
The PowerPoints will be online, as well as I believe we're able to publish a recording of the webinar, so you can actually watch even the Q&A period once we get that content online.
Great. And regarding the U-Park conversion process, has the Park District requested the delayed replacement option from the Park Service?
Well, the City of Chicago is the applicant in this case. It would not be the Park District. And we are discussing the timing with them now. As to technically what that will result in, we'll perhaps have more information about that at our next meeting.
Anything else?
I think the other questions will be better answered offline or in written responses.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, well, with that, we can adjourn the meeting, but again, we'll be here in the lobby to answer any questions that you might have of a one-on-one nature. Thank you all for coming out today.
Thank you.